Welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast, bringing you interviews, reviews and fishing tips. Here's your host, Pete Tigus.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Fly Culture Podcast. We're going to do something a little bit different today. That I'm going to talk to some friends. It's not one guest, it's not two guests. We got three guests today, and we're going to talk about fly fishing. And it feels to me as though we could be in some sort of a golden age, perhaps, of fly fishing, in that we're seeing increasing numbers of anglers join, so I'm told, our ranks, which is wonderful news. Technology as well, with rods, lines, materials for fly tying. We're seeing handling of fish improving. And more people are joining. As I said, we've still got a downside with pollution as well, but it seems to me as though anglers are becoming more vocal on that as well. And these are the sorts of things that I talk with friends with all the time. And I thought it might be interesting for our listeners to listen in a conversation between a bunch of friends talking about these sorts of issues. And we don't really know where we're going to go with this. So it'll be quite an interesting one. And as I often do, go down a rabbit hole with topics. And we're going to try and see if we can pull this one up. But I really hope that you find this as interesting and looking forward to it as much as I am. But my guests today, I think none of them need any real introduction, but I'm going to do so anyway. I've got Paul Procter here, dry fly maestro, fly casting master, writer, just all-round fisherman and good guy. I've got Ieva Breiteryte, who is just out on the water all the time, is such a great advert for fly fishing at the moment. She seems to fish every minute that she possibly can. And Andy Buckley as well, fishing guide. And Andy and Ieva as well do a really interesting YouTube channel, which if you haven't checked it out already, you should have a good look at that as well, where they cover so many fishing topics, advice, independent reviews, which is really important and interesting as well. So I think we got a really interesting mix of people to talk to today. And I thought, first off, I guess I've got to thank everyone for taking the time to talk with me. But I thought what we'd start with is tackle first off. And it seems to me that technology, like I said in the introduction, seemed to have leapt on and on at the moment. And fly rods, we're seeing a movement in fly rods now, and we've talked about these on the podcast previously, from those stiffer rods where we were popping fish to more progressive medium action rods. And I can't see that we've got incredibly light rods now. And we're seeing, I don't know if rods can go any further than there actually are at the moment. It'll be kind of interesting to see that. And what sort of, to me, backs that up is that you're seeing people sort of regress a little bit in the sense of looking at bamboo rods a little bit more, glass rods a little bit more as well. And I wonder if that's the case. And I thought this first question would be a really interesting one for Paul, because obviously you've been involved with rod design with the rods that you do at Mackenzie, and having fished and caught fish with them, that they're kind of interesting that sort of fits in with that the action of the rod is designed to cast the line really well, but also to play the fish. Where do you feel about rods, Paul, at the moment? And do you think there's further to go for them? Is there another direction they need to go in?
Well, first up, yeah, you've nailed it there, Pete. It's easy to design a fishing rod for us as individuals. If you were going to design one, you'd arguably tailor-make one for yourself. I could for my sort of skill set. I mean, the difficult part is we're all individuals and we're all at different places, and casting's subjective, that we all get a different sensation from it. So try to design or build rods to sort of be general purpose to suit everybody is very, very difficult. I mean, my God, I lost some sleep over that, I'll tell you. You put different lines through them, you do this, you do that, you tweak them, blah, blah, blah. But I was very keen to dial it back in terms of more forgiving action. Certainly from, to me, obviously, it's chicken and egg situation. Obviously, you've got to get that fly to the fish in the first place before it eats, and then you hook it and then you play it. But I guess as a generalization, slightly stiffer rods are easier to cast just simply because they don't buckle. If you just slightly overpower or too much acceleration on the cast, they don't buckle and lose that straight line path that we're always trying to achieve with the rod tape. However, if you make a rod too stiff, as you said in leading up to the question, it's so much easier to ping off on fish. So I definitely lean to more forgiving rods. I feel happier with them. And it's just about altering your casting as well, in terms of, we've gone pretty much middle of the road with the Mackenzie rods, in terms of they still deliver the fly well, still perform in breezy conditions. I took them when we were developing them, some of the prototypes down to New Zealand, Iceland, them places, maritime climate, just like the UK, very, very windy. So it was a good grounding, a good testing ground for them. But it is, for me, the key thing is a more forgiving rod, or one that will yield, not just on big fish, but a lot of our fishing now. One advancement I've seen, or understanding people seem to be getting their head round, is getting much closer to the quarry. And when you're hooking your fish that bit nearer and developing no stretch fly lines, etc., there's got to be some give in the system somewhere. And we put that in the rods.
Nice. Interesting. Ieva, I'd like to ask you the similar question, but also one of the other things I was thinking about, and where I'm going with this a little bit with rods as well, is that in the technology of moving those on. And what we've seen is where companies have tried to change handles, for example. And Reddington had a wind grip handle on their rods, which was a company that made golf club handles. I loved it. I thought it was great. I think Loop have brought a rod with a substitute handle, as have, I think, Witchwood did as well. Do you think these things, and it seems to me as though those things have disappeared again, do you think these things will continue to evolve, or do you think it's going to take a long time for that to happen, Ieva?
I have no idea. Absolutely no idea. Literally. I don't think, I was saying to Andy as well, for me, I only been exposed to the modern, perfected stuff. So I don't know how you guys were casting the old bamboo rods, or how you're feeling. Probably it was not as good, I'm assuming, but I have no idea. I will pass it on to you.
Pop that one over now.
Shifting it over.
So yeah, it's been interesting actually. There's a lot of companies tried that with the handles, haven't there? That everyone's trying to get away from cork because it's getting more scarce and more expensive. But we live and work in an industry that is pretty traditional and quite slow to change. And it just feels like every time someone tries a composite handle or a different handle, like the wing grips, it never quite sticks. You're absolutely right. Partly maybe driven by the aesthetic of it. I mean, actually, I'm going to pop this back over to Procky for a second and say, in the design process on Mackenzie, was there ever a thought to say, why don't we use something other than cork?
I don't think there was a conscious one. When we were at the factory and playing around with tapers, we did see them. There was quite a few sort of innovative things there, which I'm not at liberty to really talk about. But it really wasn't a conscious decision either way. We just went with what we had at the time. But yeah, I mean, you've got a point there regarding cork becoming more scarce, etc., etc. There will be a time when we've got to change. And one of the classics for me was not too long ago. We all with wading boots had felt soles, and consequently now we're into all this new sort of technology. And as it's turned out, it's far superior in many respects, not just grip, but harder wearing. And obviously then there's the sort of ecological impact, if you like, whereby we're not transferring spores from river to river or anything like that. So again, that was a hard one to turn around. I can remember there was quite, kickback from the angling community, like, oh, this newfangled sort of rubber soles and things like that. But that's taken hold now, and I would like to think in time it will change. But you're absolutely right. I mean, it appears that in fly fishing, tradition rules okay, kind of thing.
And that's on a wider basis as well, isn't it? Because if we look, let's take the Reddington rod, for example. When it first came out, it was red, and that clearly didn't work. And then there was a black one, and then it came back to cork again. And I think that's kind of interesting. It tells you that's Redington are operating in the biggest marketplace in America, and that hasn't worked for them, which I think is kind of interesting. So even in probably a more progressive marketplace than our one, it seems as though they were not quick to adopt those changes. And that's where I wonder with the rods themselves as well, how much further they can be pushed. And I know we've got banana rods or other products, but whether those sort of things will be adopted by anglers, it seems as though that's going to be a long, drawn out process. I think we can all agree on that, can't we?
Yeah, I would think so, Pete. Certainly on rods. I mean, consumables like tippet material, fly lines, we all seem hungry for the latest technology, and I've got to have it, this newfangled tippet material, blah, blah, blah. I mean, you and I are from a day, Ieva probably won't, where we had good old fashioned nylon, and it rots, I mean, today's fly fishers have got copolymers and fluorocarbons and blah, 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 super thin. I grew up with Maxima and things like that, geez. So, but them consumables, it's like new hook patterns for fly tying, new materials. Like I said, the tippet materials, we're on it, but you do something with a rod and it's, no, we can't have that kind of thing, Isn't that strange? Thinking about it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, and it does take time, and it probably takes people like yourselves, that people see you using that actually ultimately gives them a bit more confidence. And if you guys are reviewing it, or Paul, if you've written about it, then that probably has a little bit more credence with people. And it was interesting. You mentioned that, Paul, because I put a picture out on my social media this morning, and it was 25 years ago, and I was fishing in Colorado, and the waders I had were sort of just about nice, breathable. The sunglasses looked like I was, we'll leave that. And even I had felt soles on, exactly right, and how things even in that period of time have changed quite dramatically. It's been kind of interesting to see, and it almost feels as though these changes that we're getting right now are happening instantaneously almost, or perhaps it isn't, but it kind of feels as though those things are happening pretty quickly. And it brings me back really to fly lines and how we're seeing those adapted. And I know Paul and I, when we started, and probably yourself, Andy, as well, that was really double taper and weight forward. And I remembered buying a shooting head and thinking, putting that on my rim fly, and wow, I didn't know what to do with it the first time I cast it. It was extraordinary, and just sort of went from there, and how those things have changed. But I think one of the things, and I know we'll probably all agree, is fly lines are just so important, and it's such an important aspect of our fishing, and having this wide range of fly lines that allow us to fish in a varied way for our species. If it's a small stream, if it's a reservoir, wherever it is, allows us to do that. That's a good thing, Andy. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. It is so important. When I was working in Farlow, someone would come in and they'd say, "I want a new trout fishing outfit." I fish the Test or the Usk or wherever, and I would actually start from the fly end and work backwards. And actually, the last thing we bought was the reel, because the reality is probably the least important part of the entire rig. But actually, the tippet leader fly line for me is the crucial part of that. If your leader and tippet and your fly line are working properly, your presentation is going to be better. You'll be able to throw a slightly longer leader. And the progression in fly lines, certainly since I've been fishing, as you say, you had the option of a weight forward or a double taper. Your weight forward landed like a brick. Your double taper, once you got 40 feet of it out, was always too heavy. But the change, the development in modern tapers, particularly for the presentation angler, but also maybe for people like predator anglers who have now got these very, very short, very heavy heads. That's just in single-handed casting. Once you go into double-handed casting, all of a sudden we've got Skagits and Scandies and Motips, and it's moved on a huge amount. Even the last 10 or 15 years, the progression's been phenomenal. All this stuff just makes the process of going out and having a day's fishing a little bit easier and a little bit more pleasurable. And I think that's what this is about. I think that's why we have this progress, to try and help people to make this fishing a little bit easier and a bit more enjoyable.
And Ieva, have you noticed that since you've come to fishing, Ieva, have you noticed that as well, that from a casting point of view, for the sort of fishing, and I guess you're primarily river fishing, that the line and rod combinations that you're using are allowing you to load that rod really quickly without the need to force cast too much?
Oh, I always laugh when I see someone do 24 casts to cast out 2 rod lengths. Why the excess energy? You're going to get exhausted so much. But just to touch on the point what Andy was saying, I find it more confusing having that many options, because you look online, if I'm going to go and pick a line, and if I'm not an expert in it, and you have 100 options on one website, how in the world are you ever going to know which one to buy? I find it really difficult. I don't think it's explained well enough, even on the fly lines itself. I don't know. But yeah, definitely, I guess we cast a bit differently. I slightly overline my reel and my rod, so the casting is always easier for me to turn over 20 feet of tippet on the River Wye. I don't know how it would have been on a bamboo rod, probably a lot more difficult.
Yeah. And Paul, that's interesting, isn't it? Because initially on rivers, that would be the standard sort of thing that we would do, wouldn't it? Certainly for the little streams I'm fishing here, would go up a line weight. But now we've got lines, and I think of the ones that Rio do, but also, I think Mike Barrio led the charge with a lot of this, with designing lines appropriate for that sort of fishing. And it's been kind of interesting to see that development now, hasn't it? And how those things have changed.
Yeah, well, you and I, Pete, being that little bit older, were in that revolution where fly lines were coming out that were weighted half a line size heavier, i.e. a 6 weight would come in technically in grains at a 6.5 weight. And that was principally, and again, this was on the back of those really stiff rods, because people couldn't feel or sometimes bend the rod. And consequently, putting or overlining the rod just gives it a better sensation. I tend to stay sort of true to it, i.e. a four weight line on a 4 weight rod, and just rely on tip speed to project at short range. And again, that's where softer rods win the day, because almost under their own inertia, they'll flex to maintain that straight line path we discussed earlier, which again, fiberglass and bamboo are absolute classics for. I've got a couple of bamboo rods, and I have days when I just go out and they're heavier. Not massively heavier, and weight in terms you mentioned at the beginning, really like fly rods. I'm digressing a wee bit, but that's subjective. I'd rather have a slightly heavier outfit that was balanced well with reel and rod, and when the line's out, as opposed to one that, if you've got a long rod with a really light reel on, it feels tip heavy, and you're fighting it all day long, and it just feels wrong. So to me, the key thing is a balanced outfit. But yeah, in terms of fly lines, just on the back of what Ieva said, I've been fishing for 40 odd years, and these days I can't keep up. There's new lines out, blah, blah, blah. And how many different tapers do we need? I get that we do need certain tapers, and the predator ones, and the ones with the weight in the back of the head section for spear casting, etc. Get all that, but it is getting silly. It's getting to a point of you almost feel like, Jesus, to go fishing, I'm going to need 4 different lines, one for headwind, one for side wind, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. I am kind of showing my age a wee bit. I like a good old honest sort of, I wouldn't say traditional weight forward, but a weight forward line with quite a long, delicate front taper. One of the best for me, they don't do it anymore, was the Mastery XPS. I love that line. In fact, I bought a few up, and I've still got some brand new ones boxed in a black plastic bag hidden away in a cupboard to come out one day. Nice. Really love that line.
Yes. Yep, I used to fish those too. And it's interesting what Andy said about, weight forwards in those early stages landing like a pile of spanners. And I wonder if there's still a misconception, and particularly what you've just said, Paul, as well, a misconception that double taper lines are more delicate on the water, because as we all know, we could design a weight forward fly line, as you've said, with a delicate front taper. It doesn't matter, does it, really? And we're talking from that river point of view. It doesn't matter if it's weight forward or double taper, that if we design that delicate front taper, that doesn't matter, does it?
Absolutely not. And then, you can talk about balance. You then talk about your leader setup. That can take a massive amount of sting out of what is potentially a mediocre fly line, if I dare say that. But case in point, and we've all done it, and I see people do it when I'm at events and people are trying rods, and they take a rod out and they don't even put a tippet on. And I'm saying, what are you doing? You need that just to dissipate that energy. Otherwise, it just comes to the end of the fly line. And we've all done it, and it just goes bounce like that, And but you can make, like I said, a mediocre. If I like, make a mediocre fly line perform beyond expectation just purely by your leader on the end of it and how you build that and what you use for it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's interesting. You say about the weight forward and the early, Andy, you mentioned the early weight forward lines. And I remember casting in the garden here with one of them. And I was casting, and it was at one of those stages. It was before I was working in professionally. And I was just casting, and that stupid thing that you pull as much off the reel as you possibly can. And I did some more, and I did some more. And then I was casting. And then I made my next cast, and I thought, Pete, you've lost it. You can't cast anymore. What's happened? And it turned out I'd cracked the whole head off the weight forward part, and I've never found it.
Right.
30 years later, I've never found it. I don't know where it went. It must have been travelling with such high velocity that it's travelled into Cornwall somewhere, because I've never found it. So I broke the head off the weight forward. I don't know how I did it. I had a leader on, but that story that you mentioned, Paul, made me think of that. But that is kind of interesting. But I want to move on as well, because to me, one of the really key things that we've seen in our fishing, and we might bring CDC into this, but Ieva, I wanted to throw this to you, is tungsten beads. And I know you guys are doing great stuff, and I missed your initial offering that you're tying some flies for people to help them with their grayling fishing with tungsten beads and things. Do you think, Ieva, that tungsten beads are just such a important thing to have in your armory these days?
But as in, you do you mean tungsten beads as in itself, or just nymphs?
In the nymph side of it, yeah, and how they've affected and how they've helped your fishing and enabled you to reach those deeper sections of the river that perhaps you may not have been able to reach before.
I don't know. It's a difficult one for me, because I really like nymphing, and I keep saying I really like nymphing. And then we went out the other day, and I realized that I barely do any nymphing. Mainly, if I can, I will do the dry fly. I think it's definitely a good thing to get down as fast as you can to the deep water, especially if you're fishing for grayling. Yeah, I don't know. It's definitely, I don't know if you guys, did you used to have tungsten beads before?
When we were doing brass, it was probably a third of the weight, the same size.
Like, that's the thing for me. I came into having everything laid out for me as best, as perfected as possible. So when you say, oh, do you like tungsten beads? Like, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you always have tungsten beads? What would you have otherwise?
And that's a really interesting point about what we've been talking about this potential golden age, or this really great moment in fly fishing, that we've got these things that we can play with. And Paul, we'll come on to yourself, and then Andy's going to tie it. But I remember CDC when that first came, which is another, I think, in my humble opinion, game changer. And I remember catching fish on it and then thinking, what the hell do I do with it now? Do you remember those moments?
Absolutely. Well, can I just add to the tungsten bead sort of revolution? I'm obviously, because we're in lockdown in spring. I was tying for people, and I am just now. And everybody wants, with the grayling season, wants tungsten bead nymphs and things like that. And yeah, I mean, there's two ways of looking at it. I mean, the tonguey beads certainly get your flies down quickly. The more compact, you can build more delicate or construct more delicate flies. However, often, and this is something I learned from places like Slovenia and Bosnia, sometimes fish shy away from a nymph that's plummeting like too quickly, and you've got to back off. I tie with brass beads as well, just for a slightly lighter nymph, and some even unweighted nymphs. And yeah, you can almost use your tonguey as a sacrificial nymph and tether an unweighted nymph 2 foot away and just let that flutter about. I seem to know a hell of a lot about nymphing, given that I'm some kind of dry fly geek, don't I?
I remember us fishing when this Euro style stuff had came out, and we were on the Wiley, weren't we? And it was early, it was cold. And those things were starting to happen, weren't they? And we were both fiddling around with it. And then I remember us meeting I think we were fishing a short distance apart. And then you being a left-hander and me a right-hander, fishing side by side up the river, just fishing. I think we ended up fishing a duo and stuff, didn't we? And and doing those sorts of stuff. So it's kind of interesting. But Andy, what do you think about tungsten beads, CDC, those sorts of bits and pieces?
Well, I think the whole fly tying industry, again, it's constantly changing. Every time you log onto a social media platform, there's a new material. Again, all this stuff is making things easier. I think for me, one of the most important, certainly in the time that I've been tying flies, has been how much better the threads have got. I tie almost all of my flies now on nano silk. It's just so bloody strong for its diameter, and it's so bulkless. It's so much easier to tie a smaller fly these days, just because I feel like the threads have got so much better. And I started on, Gordon Griffith's shear in 16.0, and you pull your whip finish half an ounce too hard, and the whole thing snaps, and you start again. But that's gone now. So again, this progression to try and make tying easier, particularly with tungsten, the weight to get yourself down a little bit easier. These are all progressions that are just there to try and make the process a little bit more straightforward for people. And as Ieva says, coming into what you've described, Pete, as kind of a golden age of fly fishing, it's probably a little bit more straightforward than it was, when you guys started fly fishing. Definitely when I started fly fishing, I think everything is a little bit more simple now. All of this stuff has been tailored towards making the experience a bit more pleasurable.
It's interesting. We'll come back onto the tying thing. And I've sort of come round about I'm not even tying flies at the moment. I'm buying them because I just don't seem to feel any urge to want to tie any. I've stripped one of my lockdown jobs was to strip a load of old nymphs that I'd found and perhaps get retying them again. But I've found now that I'm almost regressing back towards the good old pheasant tail nymph and then variations thereof in. Do you think we've got almost too many materials? Do we need as much as we do to represent, and do we need to make sure we know what we're actually, rather than tying, we know about hotspots, we know about hackles, do we need to make sure that we have a good understanding of the bugs that we're trying to represent as well, Paul?
Well, I'm obviously going to say yes to that, because that's what I grew up with. Again, we're talking about this golden age, and it is really is a golden age. In many ways, I'm very envious of those coming into fly fishing, because the information is just fingertips away on a device, isn't it? When we were, Tinker Blobby wasn't around when we were nippers and growing up, and you just learnt your trade. And how I did it, I used to keep, I think you know this, Pete, and he always kind of gets a laugh if I'm at talks and things. I'm really keen on the inverts and what trout and grayling feed on. Yeah, principally for an understanding of that, but also for going forward, the environment and looking after the environment, which is key. I mean, they're the absolute fabric of the whole river system, not just the fish that live in the river, but as we know, all the creatures, pied wagtails, grey wagtails, dippers, kingfishers, otters, blah, blah, blah. All them ultimately are there because inverts are at the bottom of the food chain. But understanding them, for me, I used to keep fish tanks and go and catch bugs and watch them hatch and things like that. It came to an end one day when a caddis hatch was in full swing in the living room. I kid you not, I was kind of ordered outside with my wee fish tanks and things like that. But you learn so much. Here's an interesting thing. Corixa, they strigitate. Strigitation is what grasshoppers do when they rub their legs together and make that noise. Corixa can strigitate. I think they do it with the wing case. And the only thing I can, I'd hear this little sort of noise when I was sat watching TV and thinking, where the devil's that noise coming from? It came from the fish tank, and it was blinking Corixa. And I think they do that either to communicate or sort of, look, I'm living in, this is my little domain to other Corixa nearby, But I found it fascinating, and that gave me the great grounding. And I am sort of biased because for me, having that and understanding what you're tying to or what you want to represent and thereafter how you present it is ultimately key to my fishing. And, well, in essence, that is fly fishing, isn't it? That is it.
Yeah. And Ieva, do you find that it's easy to get that sort of information on the bugs now? But also, how do you feel? Do you like that there's many materials that we can find to represent bugs or to have those trigger points? That's a good thing, yeah?
So what I usually do is I never follow any kind of recipes. I will be watching video on YouTube or an instruction of how to tie a fly, and I will just look for something that looks the most similar to what they're using. I don't care what it's called or what size it is, as long as it's approximately at least remotely similar to what I needed. And I think that's how I came up with my olive upright when I tied straight after lockdown or during lockdown. Is I was watching loads of olive upright videos of how to tie them, and then I was like, right, I need this yellow dubbing. I don't care what kind it is, I don't care what brand it is, as long as the fly looks remotely similar and the sizing of the fly is good, the hackle is good, it will look buggy, that's fine. But I'm not an expert in fly tying, to be honest, so I can't really say anything.
That's a really interesting approach, because that's what we would have done in our day. And so there wasn't so much to play with. So you would do that. And there wasn't an easy way to find what a pattern was. I guess you found out if a pattern worked, if it caught fish or not. So that's kind of, to me, is a really interesting approach to it. And yeah, I kind of like that. But Andy, over to you. What do you think about these things? Do you think we have too many materials? Do you think we have too many patterns? Do you think the subtleties are too subtle now? Where are you with this?
So I'm probably sat somewhere between both camps. I mean, absolutely, yeah, the entomological side of things is really, really important. But the reality is, if we're talking about a nymph here, your pheasant tail, if we're talking about a pheasant tail, if you have a box of pheasant tails ranging from size 12 to size 20, you could probably imitate 50% of all the insects or all the inverts at the bottom of a river. So we know you don't need to go, too imitative. As long as it's a general likeness, but a range of sizes, something like a pheasant. A pheasant tail was designed to make catching fish on nymphs easier. It's a great imitation of a whole gamut of insects. So we're talking about a fly there that you could just go out and nymph with a box of pheasant tails and have confidence that if those fish are nymphing, you'll catch them. With regards to the kind of amount of materials, yeah, again, it would be a bit of a minefield, just as we talked about with the lines, and it always used to make us laugh in the shop in Farlow's. People would stand in front of our tippet wall, which was maybe 25, 30 feet long and 6 foot deep. And you could see people's brains just turn into mush, because it's like, what do I buy? There's 100 square feet of tippet and leaders here. I have no idea what to buy. So I think it's really important that people in shops, the staff who are working in shops, know about this stuff and can really help people and figure out what it is people want. And B, that there's plenty of good information on the internet, so that people who are buying from their front rooms rather than from the shops are getting the stuff that they need, rather than receiving something, going out and fishing with it and getting frustrated with it.
Yeah. It's a very, go on, Paul.
Sorry, Pete, go on. No, I was just going to add something on the back of that. Whilst I'm sort of geeky about insects, I'm not a fly tyer who's tying realistic flies. I'm very much of the suggestive camp. I mean, what Andy just said pretty much nailed it. You can tie a hare's ear, and it could pass off depending where you fish it in the water column. If you fish it down on the stream bed, it's a shrimp, a hog louse, a case caddis. Yeah, if it's on a lightweight hook up in the surface, it's an emerger. I'm definitely more of your suggestive school of fly tying, a busy sort of buggy-looking insect rather than an out-and-out exact replica. Because if you tie, just off the top of my head, a Batis nymph, with 6 legs and 3 tails and, all its sexual appendages or whatever you want to add to it, that's what it imitates, and that's it. Yeah, you put something on it, could to the trout or grayling, it might pass as several different food items.
Yeah, I'm absolutely with you there. I think it's Ollie Edwards, wasn't it? Did he mention suggestive stuff earlier?
It was again a revolution at one point, and you've got to admire that kind of fly tying. I mean, when you look at those things in glass cases, and they're absolutely stunning. But again, it's time investment. Do I want to spend an hour tying a fly and then lose it on the bloody stream bed, second or third cast?
Yeah. I know that as a former fishing guide that, I always like at least the fly to get a chance to get wet before it goes in a tree. So that's all I ever ask. And that hasn't always happened as well. So that's been kind of interesting. But
I'm familiar with that one, Pete.
Right. Well, let's take this in a slightly different direction now, and in again more so from myself and Paul, but also Andy as well, that we've seen this move towards catch and release more now, and people wanting to put fish back, which has always, I guess, happened, but more so people would take fish and eat them and go from there. But also the handling of fish seems to have improved. And, in very recent times, the keep 'em wet or keep fish wet now, as they're now called, and making sure you have wet hands, which is obviously really important. I'm going to go out here, and I'm sure people agree that I'd like to state that I think grayling looked better with the dorsal fin not being lifted up by somebody. That's my humble opinion. But for me, there's still a lot of stuff I don't necessarily agree with, but I don't always know that we always need to call it out in that sense that we lead, and all of us use social media, and we're going to come on to that. But do you think it's better to lead by example rather than calling people out? Or should we, because we are a small community, we're all on the same side. I guess people fish for the same reasons we do. Perhaps they don't fish as regularly as we do. But where should we be with this? And Ieva, perhaps you'd like to answer this one first. Where do you stand on that? Because I guess since you've been fishing, catch and releases has been pretty much the norm. Where do you feel we should be with this at the moment? And that whole sort of debate, really.
I think it's definitely no need to, perhaps educate rather than point out to people how awful they are for doing a certain thing. I think keep them wet movement in itself kind of created confusion for me, at least, because I think everyone was under the assumption that people cannot at any circumstance take the fish out of the water, because all they see is keep them wet. They don't go into to read the whole thing to say that it's to minimize the handling of the fish outside of water, that you can't just do a very quick lift, put the fish back, that's it. So I think that went into, at least I was getting quite a bit of comments or little digs on social media saying, well, why is the fish out of the water? Well, you can watch the video back. The fish wasn't out of the water for more than 3 seconds. Like, it's fine. I'm sure that fish swam away spot on. So on that aspect, I think it's a very good movement. I do think a lot of people are supporting it, but I do think that there has to be still a bit more educating on what the movement actually is about, that it's not just never take the fish out of the water, because I think a lot of people are under that assumption, judging from the comments that I'm getting. And then on the grayling thing, I definitely agree with you. I think I don't like the hypocrisy of things. I don't like how people go on trout fishing, keep them wet, don't take them out of the water, handle them as much as possible, handle them as little as possible. And then when it comes to grayling, yank on a bloody fin on every single photo. It's so wrong. If you look after one fish and you promote that fish handling, don't do it the other way to a grayling. What has a grayling done to you? It's still a fish.
Yeah, that's a good point. Andy, what do you think?
Well, as you say, Pete, it's changed a huge amount, and it's probably changed inside a generation. I look back at when I first started fishing, going out with my dad, and he would always say, if you get a nice wild, you knock it on the head because they taste better. And you look back and you think, oh God, what were we doing? But this has changed in 20 years. This attitude, and it's a great thing. Yeah, any kind of education for people about how to handle these fish correctly is brilliant. We're talking about we probably fish for some of the most delicate fish in the UK. When you talk about trout and grayling, you've maybe put pike in there as well because they're a very fragile fish. But these are delicate things. We need to be careful with them. As Ieva said, we cop a little bit of flack because we do grip and grins. We're super careful with it. We're still the only people I've really ever seen walking around a river with an unhooking mat. And I'm confident that what we're doing is okay and it's working fine. But there is definitely a kind of generational change here towards wild fish. I think people respect wild fish more. I think all the efforts being made to clean these rivers, to sustain the clubs. Barbless hooks is a brand new thing. It's all being done to minimise the impact that we have on these environments. And I think that's great. I think that creates a really sustainable sport that people can look at from the outside who don't fish and say, well, actually, these guys are putting hooks in these creatures and should they or shouldn't they? But the rest of what these guys do is very clean, very tidy, and actually you can see through the investment in the environments and through the care that's taken by people like Paul doing bug counts and stuff like that. Fly anglers are actually good for their environment, and that's really important. I think that's something we should be very proud of and keep building on.
Yeah, I think that's, anglers as a whole, we do care about our quarry. Sometimes people don't always understand everything. And I always, again, and we're all the same in this, that we're our circle of friends are largely anglers who get what we get and feel what we feel. But as I've said on podcasts before, that not everyone is fishing every single day. Not everyone is looking at social media. So they may not necessarily know these sorts of things. But we've seen, as you say, Andy, Paul and I, we've seen a big change in things, haven't we? Where, like you say, it was perfectly, people would knock a fish on the head and that was it. And there has been a big change, Paul, hasn't there?
Yeah, what Andy's saying, it's happened in a generation. Again, I can remember being a kid and it seemed that you hadn't had a good day unless you'd got your bag limit kind of thing, And thankfully those days are gone. And we have ultimately, Andy's right, wild fish always taste better, or Andy's dad was right, they always taste better. And, we only have to look at what's happened with salmon. I nearly said salmon then, that bad habit. Yeah. When I was a kid, it seemed there was an endless supply of these fish. And sadly, through death by 1,000 cuts, that we know where we're at today. And in that bygone era, people just killed at will. And we've had to change our ways. And it's for the good of not just the environment, but our sport as well. There's been a big shift as well. I cut my teeth on wild fish. I was very lucky, and 8-ounce fish, and I then got into an angling club and stocked waters, and there was these really big things swimming around, and you thought, bloody hell, I'll have a bit of this, and then that kind of wanes, and I've done sort of full circle, gone through all that. Not that there's anything wrong with catching stockfish. That's quite an important part of our fishing sort of community to have that. I won't digress into that, but it's quite important. But yeah, on the fish handling, I agree with Ieva. It's no good. We could all. I could go on social media now, as we all could, and I could show you dozens of bad examples of poor fish handling. there's a lot of negativity out there. I prefer a positive slant, and absolutely, Ieva's right, is lead by example, and we need to educate people. We can all point the finger and say, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, but invariably I find people tend to respond better to a carrot rather than a stick. Well, I did anyways as a kid, so that's the way I'd like to do it. And I'd like to think, when I mean, we're hunters. Fishing is technically it's hunting. And as a kid, I was ruthless. So we've had this discussion over a beer, Pete, and we're very much alike in that sense. We didn't have devices and things. You went out and you had a catapult and you killed animals and things like that. And it sounds awful now, but part of that was being inquisitive to have a look at that animal and if it was a bird, open its wing and its beak and its eye and look at it. And what I'm leading up to, part of our angling enjoyment is, fooling the fish, that's a big kick. But just to look at your prize and admire it for a minute is, to me, that's a bit of a big kick. And especially when you get an old warhorse of a trout and you think, by God, he's been through the wars and things like that. And, we should be able to just take a snap and share it with people. What is wrong with that? So long as we do it, as we've discussed, try and keep them wet and very quick. I see photos of people with fish on grassy banks or away from the river. That's wrong, but we shouldn't really, as I say, be going off on one with them. We should be sort of politely saying, look, in future, just net the fish, just have it by the water, quick snap and fish away,
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's interesting. Everyone sort of agrees on that as well. And it is, as you all know, with the magazine, we do the same, and we put the keep fish wet principles in the back. And we don't have those sorts of so many, we don't really have grip and grins in there as well. So to try and see if that affects people in different ways. And with the social media that I put out, I try my best when I can to make sure that we have those sorts of images without preaching. And I think we're all on the same team, and that's the important thing to remember. And looking ahead, I hope that is, and people either listen to this or see things and think, oh, actually, and I know you guys all, how you take photographs is interesting, different, and does the fish justice in a way that doesn't harm it. So that's really cool to hear. And I thought I'd move on really to about information. It was interesting. Some of the stuff you ever mentioned about fly tying and stuff like that. And, a little while back, it was harder to get this, but now it's great. And I don't know if this is one of the boosters behind this so-called golden age that we're talking about. It's about getting information. We're going to come on to social media. I really want to talk more about the internet as a whole at the moment. And now it's much easier to gain access to fishing, to find out about fishing, learning how to fish. As instructors, we can now learn, actually, if you've never picked it up. And I've mentioned on here before that people who I've found who've never picked up a fly rod before have watched some YouTube stuff and got a good understanding of how to cast. Even tracking down a guide or instructor, it used to be word of mouth in our day, Paul, but now it's easier to talk about. And Andy, particularly with your guiding business, you've really embraced it. And I'm going to throw it across to Paul in a second as well. And Ieva, perhaps if you've used some thoughts on this, but to you first, Andy, who's built a guiding business. And I know we first really started talking when you started guiding, really. And I've always tried to talk with people who are setting up a guiding business, but with the internet now, it's so much easier to reach people than in the olden days, I guess, where you had an advert or word of mouth. Do you think that sort of moment now is to build a reputation, to build a business now, right now, if I was starting, would be much harder to do because it's a bigger marketplace, or is it easier? What do you think, Andy?
Oh, well, I think there are kind of two different questions in there. I think possibly the first question you're asking is it easier to set up with you not having to go through those traditional kind of paper marketing channels? It's something actually I mentioned in the podcast we did a while ago. I've never had to put an advert in a magazine. I've never had an advert in a magazine. It's just not something that I've had to do. Whereas I look back I've still got some of Dad's old copies of Trout and Salmon, and then the classified section is, these little square boxes. I think it was 2 inch by 2 inch, wasn't it? And you put as many words in it as you possibly could. Those days are over. Is the reality. We've got this amazing search tool, the internet, that we can fill with as much information as possible, and people are driven towards social media channels as well. So in terms of setting up, I think it'd be much easier to do it now than it was when you guys did it. Definitely, 100%. Is it easier to build a reputation? I'm not sure it is. I'm not going to say it's harder. I'd say it's different. I think the internet is a brilliant tool for positivity. It is a ruthless tool for negativity. And if someone has a bad experience with a product or with a company or with a something or other, within 24 hours, it's all over the internet, and any reputation you've built can be getting dragged back down into the gutter pretty quickly. So I think what the internet creates is a great tool for building, but a very, very fine line in terms of sustaining a reputation. So in a way that perhaps before wouldn't. If your chap who booked you in a magazine had a bad day, he could go and tell his mates, but that's probably as far as it'd go. Whereas now it'll be all over TripAdvisor, all over Facebook, and that could be a real battle. Touch wood, it's not happened yet, but I think possibly the internet, because it's an information tool, it could possibly actually make it slightly more difficult to sustain a reputation.
Interesting. Ieva, you guys run the IB and Andy fishing channel on YouTube, and you have 10,000 subscribers. Do you find that a lot of that is that sort of positive feedback that you're getting, but do you still sort of kind of get that negative stuff from people who just want to do it for the sake of it and put negative stuff for the sake of it?
What my favorite comments, I keep saying to Andy, are the comments that start, "I don't want to criticize you, but..." They're the best comments. And I think I had one yesterday as well in my last video where I was using an indicator rig, and they were like, "Well, it's not really fly fishing, is it? It's not fly fishing." And I think with YouTube, it's very easy to be negative, very easy to criticize, because everything is anonymous. There's no face, there's no name to it. You can say whatever you want. You can be very mean. Thankfully, we don't get many of those. We're very lucky that most of it is really positive. And some of it, like from people that followed us from lure fishing side, now are people like still watching our fly fishing videos, and they're joining fly fishing, and like we can follow their journey as we go along. Usually we have a really nice community built there, and I think we're really lucky in that sense. But just to touch on the information and the internet, I found it really interesting how if I'm looking for something or if I'm asking for advice, all I think I need to keep in mind is that person is going to tell me their favorite thing. It's not necessarily the best thing. Everyone's going to say that, like, if I'm going to be looking at how to French nymph or how to tie a fly or how to do whatever, they're always going to say this is the best thing to do, or this is the best rod to use. But it's always that person's best thing, and there's going to be 100 different methods how to tie a rig or how to tie a fly. And I think it's really hard to narrow it down and pick what is right for me, for example.
Interesting. And also where you mentioned about an indicator and stuff like that. Well, I've been fishing them a little bit recently, and I'm making a fly cast. I'm doing that stuff. It's just a hark back to days that when I'd not done it for so many years, and I really bloody enjoyed it. So that was good fun. But Paul, for me, social media as well, the way I think about it sometimes is that it's the equivalent of if you've passed someone in a car and flipped two fingers at them, you can easily drive off again without. And that's how I think about social media, in that sense, that you can sort of hit and go off, and hit and run's the wrong term, but you can make that comment and go away, whether it be anonymously, be it whatever it is. Do you think that's something that will continue? I guess it probably does, doesn't it? Because it's a microcosm of life. But what do you think about these issues?
Me?
Yeah.
What issues? The guiding issue.
All of those, actually. Now that we've talked about the guiding issue, setting up, because again, I think it was 15 years ago when we first did those AAP guy things, and it was a different place then, and you had the adverts.
2006. I think I looked at my first certificate, and I think it was 2006.
I may have been a couple of years before, because I think I'd just done mine when you first came, hadn't I? So I think Lee, Paul.
Yeah. Sorry, did you say 15 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago?
I think it was 15. I was just coming up. I was 39 and I'm 54 now. So I was just coming up. Yeah. So I wanted to do it for my 40s. But there's been that massive change, hasn't there, in that side of it? And so the internet has been a big part of that with websites and everything else. And we're, as Andy said, you could have those adverts in a magazine and potentially reach people. But also it was other guides. And as you know, we used to speak, Jim, Nick, we all used to speak to each other. So we all knew who was doing what, and we would recommend people as a result of that. That's happening, but on a wider basis now, I guess.
Yeah, well, first of all, I was guiding before I took my AAP guy exams or casting certificates, and that really just came about because in that day, I don't know, I'm hearing things now that certain individuals think that, qualifications are rubbish, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's fine. I just, for me personally, felt compelled to have some grounding and understanding. I was lucky that I'm quite well hand-eye coordinated and picked up casting quite easily, but didn't understand the mechanics and whys and wherefores, Pete, which is why I went down the AAP guy route and met a lot of people like yourself, wonderful people. And there was a sort of gang of us: Jim Fern, Jim Williams, Lee Cummins, yourself, Brett O'Connor. And we all sort of bounced off each other, met up and cast and sort of moved things forward for all our personal developments. But on the guiding thing, I came away from it kind of burnt out, did a stint, and I admire what Andy's doing. It takes a lot of doing, does that, and to do it day in, day out. You can put shots up and say, this is my office, and that is great. But there are periods, whether you agree or disagree, that sometimes it just becomes overwhelming if you get a really difficult client and it's a really tough conditions and they're expecting magic, and you can come home really beat up because you think, God, we didn't get a fish or whatever, and you take it personally, or I used to, and I moved away from it. I'm actually doing quite a bit of guiding now. I haven't sort of gone out there and advertised it. Strangely enough, it tends to be word of mouth stuff, the good old fashioned way kind of thing, and one or two people coming back to me. Same with the fly tying. I'm tying for a small customer base at the moment, and again, that's just word of mouth. But it's just changed massively. I mean, you've got to, and I know we're coming on to social media. To do what Andy's doing, there is a fine line between this good reputation, bad reputation, and you've just got to put yourself out there and be at the front of it on the internet, projecting. And that's where I fall down. You said it in the opening gambit, or we had the wee chat before we came live. I don't fully understand it all, and I have periods I like it, then I hate it, and I really struggle with that side of it. And I think that's just an age thing. It's not that I'm a technophobe. Sometimes I go fishing, I have a great day. I don't even take photos. I don't post anything. I just want to keep that personal for me. Some of the places I go to, some of the fish I catch, I just want it in there, and that's important to me. One of my gripes, I'm digressing a bit, is people always posting from the riverbank. To me, fishing's quite sacred. Maybe this is being old-fashioned and old git or whatever, but my fishing, I grew up where it's sacred. You go fishing, and that's kind of it. Yeah, sure, do all whatever you want to do when you get back, but when I'm fishing, and that's it. I don't want interruptions. I just want to enjoy my time by the river.
Really cool point. And I was similar. And I think that harks back to my guiding days, that when I'd been out, because, and we'll come back to you, Andy, on this very quickly as well, but I wanted to show people I was working. I wanted to show them we'd had them out. So usually what would happen is when I came back home, one of the first things I do is, this is going back, download the pictures or put the card in the computer and upload the pictures, if that's the right term, and do those sorts of things just to show. And that's carried through into my personal fishing now, that yes, I'm with you, that I put those images up when I get home. There's nothing sort of live. It doesn't matter if it isn't, but I'm similar to you, that I'm fishing, right, I've got a snap of the fish, or there's a beautiful one of me and the dog or Emma casting or whatever, but it usually will only go up at the end of the day. But Andy, that's an interesting one that Paul said, that, you know, about the guiding and the burnout, and you're doing a lot of days. And I know, you know, I remember days when I'd do 15 days without a breather and you're still smiling, but you're bloody knackered. But it is an interesting, fascinating road to go down, isn't it? And it looks as though you're really thriving in it.
I haven't really experienced, and I've spoken to plenty of people who have. I haven't really experienced the burnout. I love guiding. I absolutely love guiding. I love fishing. I love being by a river. I love being in the process. I've said before, it doesn't matter to me if it's not me that's catching the fish. Just the process, the stalk, finding that rising fish, getting the client in the right spot. Can we work out the drift? Can we work out the fly? I did 23 days on the bounce, May and June this year. On day 24, I got up in the morning, tied some flies, and went fishing myself. Because I just wanted to get back out there. I just wanted to see it again. Because, you know, a couple of days where the hatch was changing, and you know, what the hell are they feeding on? I've got to tie size 18 this. I'll try size 16 as well. Will it work without the hackle? Will it work with the hackle? I haven't experienced that. I'm very, very lucky in that I have my own personal therapist who I can get back to after a day's guiding and say, God, that was hard today. That was really tough. The wind was howling, or we were really struggling casting off the true left bank. He was a right-hander, or, you know, and I can get that on the system and talk it through with someone who's willing to sit there and listen to that at midnight. And I find that a real help. I think it'd be much harder if I didn't have you to come and kind of talk about the day with. So yeah, it's never really been a thing. If someone offered me 365 days a year of guiding, I'd probably take it. I absolutely love it. I absolutely love being out there. I really do. I know it's not sustainable in the very, very long term, but geez, there's nowhere I'd rather be. I've said it to clients before. You know, we'll fish the full 8.5 hour day or whatever it is, and we'll get to 9 o'clock, and they'll say, "Oh, we'll probably ought to pack up now, shouldn't we?" Why? Where else would you rather be? I'm happy if you are, and we just fish and fish and fish. So yeah, it hasn't really been a thing for me. I'm blessed here with the number of venues. I'm blessed with the number of private venues. So, you know, you're not constantly burning the same places over and over again. So I'm very, very lucky geographically. But I'd say more than anything, lucky to have someone that I can come and talk about my day's work with afterwards. I think that's really important.
Cool. Let's go down a really interesting wormhole now. And I saw Marks and Spencer's are using influencers to promote their Christmas offerings this year. That's instead of doing a TV advert. And I guess this shows a shift in how retailers are reaching potential purchasers. And I guess we're going to see elements of this going on in fishing, as many other spheres of whatever popular pastimes there are as well. Interestingly, though, I've been doing a sort of bit of research in the background, and people like Ariana Grande has a huge, I don't know a song, so apologies, but it was a name that came up, and allegedly 40% of her huge amount of followers were bought. Now, I'm told that goes on everywhere in high-profile people, and it's a standard thing to actually do. Now, the interesting thing about that is, for me, is that we've just had the election result come through, and in the US, and Kanye West was standing and with a big reach potentially. And I searched, apparently he doesn't do Instagram, but he's got ways of doing that via his wife and everything else, failed to reach voters. And I think he only polled about 60,000 people. So that makes me think, if Marks and Spencers are doing this sort of stuff, do you think that people will buy products because they are being placed? And I understand fully why companies are doing that. It's a cheaper way of advertising. It costs them some products, some gear, whatever it may be. But do you think people are going to be buying products because somebody has a large amount of followers? Where do we sort of kind of stand on that? And Ieva, kick this off for us. Where do you think this is in fishing? If this enters our little world, I suspect there might be that may happen. Where do you stand on this? Where do you think?
So I think it's very different. Well, it's a big difference because we talked about this quite a bit, haven't we? You can see who it's again, I said it in my podcast before. It's very easy to press a like or to press a follow or to write a comment on Instagram. It's not very easy to part with your money and whose opinion you choose to acknowledge and respect and follow. So I will often see big accounts reposting the same and for example, promoting the same product or not selling a product and just having to keep promoting it. While, I don't know, we put a video out saying that's what we sell and we sold out within 6 hours, not unexpectedly at all. So I think people perhaps are seeing through it all now. I'm hoping that people are smart enough to see through the fakeness of it all. If there is, I just hope that people choose who they follow or where they part with their money and whose opinion they trust. Just a little bit more careful. And I think it is the case. I just don't know why companies wouldn't see through that, because it feels like people are seeing it through, but companies will support just for the numbers of it rather than does that person actually have any influence? Because I can guarantee right now that my account, where I have loads of more followers than Paul, for example, will never have as much influence as Paul. So Paul will post something to his 3,000, 4,000, whatever, how many people he can reach. And there will be more people that will buy or follow his advice than there will be if I reach 30,000 people with my post. And that's only a good thing because he's a really experienced angler. People trust him. I'm just a newbie. So it should be that way. It's just that a company would, for example, approach me because they think, well, she can reach more people, but do I have the influence with that reach or not?
That's the really interesting point. And that's where I guess I was coming with this. And Paul, I know we talked about it the other day. We've had a couple of phone conversations about it. And the term I used was that it's a bit like the Wild West in that sense, and whether it settles down. Now, as Ieva says, if you said to me, this is good, I would say it was good. If Andy said to me it was good, I'd know it was good. And Ieva as well, because I know the reviews you do on your YouTube channel are correct and independent, which is really important. But Paul, where do you you think this is something that might settle down and might change a little bit in the next year, 2 years, whatever it is? That's probably a long time in social media, I guess.
Oh, bloody 1 day is a long time in social media. First of all, Ieva, thank you for the kind comments, and she put it far more eloquently than you did, Pete. Can Ieva not ask the questions? It's where do we begin on this one? I mean, I'm like you, Pete. We've said this, and it's a bit of a cliche, and you nailed it. That's a great analogy. It's like the blinking Wild West out there. I fully don't understand it. I probably don't use it or maximise the tools. Like I say, I can have periods. I just don't want nothing to do with social media for 3 or 4 days, and then I have a little bit of a spurt. And that's not me criticising people who are using it every day, you know. And it's good that it's there in many respects because we need it right now in the circumstances we find ourselves with, COVID. But influence, I mean, Ieva's right. I suppose I can see tackle companies using, I think some of them potentially do use influencers, but are these, I'm assuming that likes are being bought in the tackle industry. I don't even know where to begin with that because and Ieva seems to know how many followers I've got, and I don't even know how many followers I've got. That's shocking, really, isn't it? I mean, I put ultimately with influencers, it's got to be somebody you would trust and know ultimately in the tackle trade that's had a grounding, has served an apprenticeship and come up through the ranks. And yeah, arguably you've seen a lot of youngsters, and again, I'm not knocking that, everybody's got to start somewhere, but have they ultimately got that depth of knowledge, and can they speak broadly on a subject if you just pull anything out of a hat and say, let's discuss this in terms of fishing? You know, the panel we've got here, if you throw anything out, I reckon we could be sort of scrapping on who answers it first with their opinion. And I've sat on fishing panels at various events and things like that, and there's one or two people who've been there who've struggled to have the content to answer questions and things like that. So it's a difficult one, because ultimately what we're seeing on Instagram and that, if you're very good, you can project yourself, and there's nothing wrong with this, and appear to be arguably something you're not. Key example, if I was a whiz kid, I could probably set myself up anonymously tomorrow as some kind of, a politician, for example. You know, there we go. Who's to know any different?
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I definitely do. And, this is going down the old guard route, that in the olden days, and I remember when before I did my app guy, I did 2 years with another qualification, but also working with Nick as well subsequently. And I remember us pike fishing in South Devon at Slapton Lee, and he got a phone call from Hardy. And that's when they were starting up their academy then. And that was a really big deal that companies approached you to do that. Now, interestingly, via the magazine, and I have no idea. Emma finds builds the stuff. I put the content out, and I might take something from the magazine. I wrote something this morning, just a few short lines, just to let people know we're out there and this is how we feel about stuff. But I get messages saying we're looking for influencers from random companies in wherever it is. And that's a lot different from that phone call he took then to now. And they may look, right, they've got however many it is. I think we got whatever it is. It's not a huge amount. And like you, I don't understand how you buy these things. But I wonder if there will be a tipping point where companies realize that if follower numbers are sold, are bought to sell potentially other stuff, and it's not working because it's not actually real, then that may be the tipping point where we start to see things change a little bit. But Andy, do you have views on this and where you think this sort of stands, and whether this sort of thing continues for the time being?
Well, I guess marketing is evolving, isn't it? It feels like we've gone away from an old style of marketing that revolved around return on revenue. ROI was king, and putting an advert in the trout and salmon, how much we're getting back from it. That's, we need to work this out. To a visibility based style of marketing, and I don't think that's anyone's fault. If you were the marketing director of a global fishing brand, and you had the opportunity to have an influencer with 60, 70, 80,000 followers who could give you a guaranteed visibility every single week of 100,000 people, and you turned it down, your managing director would hammer you. He'd say, why have we missed that opportunity? Why has another company now got that visibility that we could have had? So actually, I don't think this is anybody's fault. I only think it's driven by change. Marketing is changing very, very quickly. And I think industry as a whole, the whole kind of global industry is struggling to kind of keep up with it and work out where it is. What we can rely on here is that ultimately all of these companies well, the end game is black and white. Are we making money or not? And at some point, I agree with you, Pete. There's going to be a settling down process where some of these companies look at this and go, "Hang on a minute, actually, we're providing big retainers or a lot of kit or all this stuff to these influencers. Are we actually getting any return on this? Is this working?" Henry Ford said, wasn't it, that 90% of his advertising budget is a waste of money, but he has no idea which 10% works. And I think eventually we'll get to that with this influencer style of marketing. Is this actually providing sufficient ROI to be sustainable? And if it's not, you can trust business to be black and white on this. If it's not sustainable, if it's not working, it'll go away. If it turns out that we are wrong, and actually the ROI is there, that this is making money, it'll grow. It's going to get bigger. And as advertising platforms change, there's no avoiding it. The magazines are struggling now, and as the magazines struggle, as subscription-based paper marketing continues to fall, these companies are going to look for alternative ways of advertising their products. They've got to. And actually, the influencer-based style of marketing is pretty quick and pretty simple for a company who are looking to diversify the marketing strategy. It's not going to go away, I don't think, anywhere in the near future. If M&S have committed this amount to doing what you said they're doing, that's a sign there that this is something that isn't going away. The point you've touched on about paid likes is really interesting, because the probability is that the ROI numbers or the idea that it might not be working will happen sooner, because all of a sudden that visibility doesn't have any value. And you'll be able to realize much sooner in the marketing process here, actually, yeah, this has been seen by 100,000 people, but we haven't sold anything. And eventually those accounts that are doing that one by one will start to get pushed away. And eventually, yeah, I agree with you, this will settle down. It's going to take some time, and it's going to take marketing as a whole to figure out how it wants to do it.
Yeah, I guess our marketplace is so small, so that's where it's probably difficult for it to work. You could see it working in a big market like the US, but to our little marketplace, I'm not 100% sure how that works. But one of the things I wanted to move on from, I think we've covered that in a really interesting way. Has anyone got anything else they'd like to say on that before I change it?
Well, and just a comment Andy threw out, just on the magazines, actually Trout and Salmon, and I believe some of the others are enjoying quite a upsurge at the moment, which I principally think's down to the environment we're in right now, and people have got time on their hands and just want to read and things like that. I hope that continues, because again, being an old-fashioned sort, it's nice having sort of hard copy in your hand and pages to flick through and things like that. I hate reading things on devices, but anyway, there we go.
I'm with you on that. Let's move on then. And I wanted to talk about conservation. And Paul, as Vice President of the Wild Trout Trust, Ambassador for Salmon and Trout Conservation Trust, the volume, to me, it seems, has been turned up about, and let's talk about pollution, because I've talked about it on a number of podcasts now, and that volume has been turned up. And I think, the work and also the Grayling Society as well, and the other ones as well, the other NGOs. But do you think we are getting to a state where more anglers are being engaged by wanton pollution by water companies, other practices that are polluting the waterways? Do you think that volume is getting louder and companies are starting to listen now? Paul, you kick us off with that one.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, back to the social media. I mean, things are out there. Is there any pollution incidents just now? It's like Andy was saying, with your reputation as a guide. If you have a stinker of a day, everybody sort of knows about it quite quickly. Well, it's the same with pollution incidents, whether it's from water companies, landowners, or whatever. the all-seeing eyes out there. We're all carrying cameras and devices. We photograph it, and it's there for everybody to see. That's absolutely right, and that's the way it should be. I'm going to mention, I don't know him personally. I know Ieva and Andy definitely won't know him because he was an 80s pop star, but Fergal Sharkey, I admire what he's doing. That is fantastic. Sometimes I feel a little bit ashamed because we can all get sidetracked. Like Andy, I have an absolute passion and love for fishing, and I just like being out in the field as much as I can. And something's got to give. You can spread yourself too thinly, or you can't be in two places at once. And ashamedly, I can take my eye off the ball, and I often think, geez, I should be highlighting more things that are wrong in the environment and with the insects and things like that. But fair play to, obviously, Wild Trout Trust, Salmon and Trout Cons, as you mentioned, and River Fly Partnership as well. They weren't mentioned here because they ultimately were the catalyst for the Smart Rivers project that the Salmon and Trout Conservation are doing now. And it's just that little bit of awareness. And one thing I would say about the sort of newbies, if I dare include Ieva here, is they seem a lot more switched on in terms of care for the environment. We kind of grew up in that generation, Pete, rightly or wrongly, where there was a sort of perhaps less respect for the environment, and we didn't, it seemed a never-ending supply of X, Y, and Z. And now that them halcyon days have gone, and we've really got to protect what we've got. And and that's one good thing with social media. And yeah, the volume definitely is getting louder on that, and hopefully it will continue to get louder.
Yeah, as you know, Fergal's a guest on here, and it was fantastic. And I speak to him from time to time about stuff as well. And if anyone, he's mainly on Twitter, and if anyone isn't following him already, just I try and do it, retweet if he says the stuff that needs to be said, and I try and tag in James Bevan from the Environment Agency in that as well to make sure he's seeing that, and I know for a fact that he is. And I know he's listened to that podcast as well because I've been told he has. So if we can continue turning that volume up to 11 until something is done, it still needs to be that the water companies need to be fined more, and then they might start investing in the infrastructure. That's my hope with that, but we'll keep pushing that. Andy and Ieva, have you anything to add to that as well? Because obviously you guys are on the river the whole time. Is there anything you'd like to add to those comments as well?
Do you know, the first thing I want to do is echo exactly what Procky said there. I've listened to Fergal's podcast 3 or 4 times now. It's one of those ones I'll put on basically every time I sit down at the Vice, and every time I listen to it, I have a huge amount of respect and admiration, but this little shadow of guilt on my shoulder saying, you should do as much as this guy. You should be doing this much. And we touched on guiding earlier, and burnout and difficulties and stuff like this. There is nothing that stresses me out more than the idea of one of those rivers getting polluted, because my castle is built on the quality of those rivers. So yeah, it's fabulous that people are doing more. We could all do more. Again, I'll echo what Procky said. I did my river fly last year to be able to monitor the inverts on the waterways. It's the canary in the coal mine, isn't it? But being able to turn up the heat on these big water companies is absolutely vital. And actually, as has already been said, one of the great things about social media is that you don't have to write a strongly worded letter anymore. You can tweet James Bevan. You let him know what's going on directly. He can't avoid it. They can't escape it. As Procky says, we've all got cameras in our pockets. It can go straight on Twitter, straight on Facebook. We see it time and time again. Unfortunately, time and time again, we're still seeing major pollution incidents. Now, I don't know what's going on in Wales at the moment, but it seems like every couple of months, one of those little tributaries is getting whacked. We had incidents actually pretty close to home, didn't we? The Upper Trent got polluted really badly, huge fish kill. Was it the Team that got done a couple of years ago? Huge fish kill, Great Trout River, basically biologically dead by the end of it. I don't know what the outcomes of those were, but I do know that the outcomes that I've bear witness to in the past, it's specifically talking about the Wandle there, maybe the outcomes aren't good enough, the fines aren't big enough. I was told that one of the precedent cases is one of the pollution incidents on the Wandle in the early 2000s, for which Thames Water were given a massive fine, which on appeal was reduced to half a year's general employee's salary. And apparently that is one of the precedent cases now for these pollution incidents. And if that's how the government is going to stand up to the environment, we're all going to have to work a lot harder.
Great. Excellent. Ieva, we started this conversation, is there anything you'd like to say about this pollution conservation, anything along those sorts of lines?
The only thing I think I would like to say is everyone's, most of the time, and I think including me as well, will be very, very quick to blame Environment Agency, but I do think they so spread thinly, that we all need to support the Environment Agency a little bit as well, and just have their backs when they are fighting cases, and Angling Trust and the Fish Legal when they are trying to do their best, rather than just go on a rant in the comment sections on the Environment Agency's page. Well, you're not doing enough, you're not doing enough, you're not doing enough, you're not doing this. But yeah, definitely, I feel mega guilty now sitting here that I'm not doing enough. But I think, yeah, we definitely could do more, especially with social media and making sure we reach as many people as possible.
Good points. And it's interesting, isn't it, where we talked about social media and we chatted about the fish handling. That's where it's important that we don't fragment our community and we don't call people out, because they may be the same people who help us in the fight to get our waterways in a better, cleaner shape, I guess, don't we? But let's start. We're almost an hour and a half into this now, so I'm going to start to wind things down now. But we started this conversation about talking about fishing as a whole and the state it's in. Is it a golden era that we're actually in at the moment? Ieva, I'd like you to kick us off with this, about how you feel about the state of fishing as somebody relatively new, and you're not brand new to this. You know, it's 5-6 years you've been fishing now, so you've seen a little bit over a few seasons now. How does it feel to you fishing, even in that shortish period of time? How does fishing feel to you right now, and how's it looking, and what are your hopes for it?
So I think we can always do more to get more people into fishing. There's never going to be enough of things that we can do. Definitely promoting fishing outside of the fishing industry, so not just to the same people over and over again. I think we could do something clever with perhaps getting people fishing that are coarse anglers or carp anglers, getting them into fly fishing if we want that. But I think overall, because of the lockdown and what was happening, a lot of people have joined and a lot of people have started fishing. I just hope that they stick, now that our lives are going to get back to normal at some point, if we ever do, that they stick to fishing and they keep fishing, because it would be great to have these numbers. There's still not enough numbers, I don't think. I think we could do a lot better. I don't know how it used to be or how many people used to be anglers 20 years ago. But I think, again, we're having this false vision of seeing lots of people, lots of younger people on social media, because we are the people that use more social media. But yeah, I don't know. I think overall, I'm very positive at the moment, just because of that little influx of people that we had over lockdown. That's
great to hear. Andy, how does it feel?
Well, I think Ieva's hit the nail on the head. We're at a period of opportunity here. For the first time, actually, in a while, specifically for fly fishing, a little period of opportunity here, where we are being seen to do the right things environmentally with a switch towards more wild and sustainable fishing. I'd be fascinated to find out how many of the pollution incidents that have been reported in the last 5 years have been reported by anglers. I think the AT need that number. That for me would be really important. You can legitimize the entire industry just by getting that number and proving that we are the guardians of the waterways, which I think we would all agree is probably true. it's a really funny period, isn't it? As we've talked about, marketing is changing, the way we fish is changing, people's lifestyles are changing. Obviously, 2020 has been one big change. But yeah, I feel like there's opportunity here for the whole of fishing, particularly actually for fly fishing, because it gets people a bit further away from real life. You know, I think as fly anglers, we're lucky that a lot of what we do is further into the wild than your average course angler. I know that's not broad, I know it's not true of everything, but I think as fly anglers, we're quite lucky. We get to go to places that not many people actually ever get to see. And I think that's really attractive for the public at the moment. I think with the lockdowns and, Angling Trust have done brilliantly to keep fishing on the table during this lockdown that we're in now, the November lockdown. So, yeah, I think we've got a real opportunity here. The problem is I'm not sure how to best take that opportunity. And I haven't really found anyone that is. And I'd be really interested to find any opinions from both of you two guys about how do we grasp hold of this now and say to not only the fishing public but the general public, here's something that's so great, we bloody love it, this is so good, and it's so good for the environment and so good for your physical and mental health. Come with us, come and do it. How do we engage people now?
I think we're going to come on to Paul in 2 seconds, but I think basically what is happening, you've got the TV program, obviously White House and Mortimer, I think is doing nothing but good for fishing across the board. I think these conservation issues are bringing other people to the table who are saying, oh, actually, what's going on here? This looks pretty interesting. That's bringing them. And I think we might start to see a little bit more of that. And one of the pushes I would like to have coming into Christmas is try and get this smoked salmon thing sorted out and have a go at the salmon farms as well. And I wonder if that's a way of engaging people in a different way, in a roundabout way, rather than the obvious one. And we've got these great schemes out there to encourage people to fish as well, at children at school level, all the way through as well. But I wonder if there's ways to engage people in a wider way, and it may be on an ecological level more than anything else. But Paul, I think you should be involved with this now as well. But, we've seen a lot. How does it feel to you, and what do you think?
We're in a great place, I think, at the moment. Obviously, you didn't purposefully steal my thunder, but yeah, Paul Whitehouse and Bob Mortimer, I mean, that program, you just can't help but like it. And I'm pleased that it's broadcast on a major sort of channel or platform on BBC. And you just look at Bob. I'm just hoping that Joe Public see Bob. How infectious is he with, and you just can't make up his excitement. You couldn't fake that, and that's wonderful to see. And it just shows that there's a lot more to fishing than just catching fish as well. There's the company, and I know certainly you do the same as me, Pete. I hazard a guess that Andy does. I often cook meals and brew up and things by the river, and that's quite an important part of my sort of fishing schedule now, if you like. It's a bit of a ritual I go through. But yeah, back to fishing. I mean, what Whitehouse and Mortimer are doing, or that series, has just been fantastic. It's just got better and better. We're at series 3 now, yeah, just done.
I think
they've got another one on the go, have they?
I think they've got the green light. Yeah,
great. That's fantastic news. Yeah, we discussed social media a wee bit. I think that's definitely good for us as well, and it's really nice to see the big jump or big leap, or if you want to call it, has been women into fishing over recent years. That's fantastic, and I think that's brought a little bit more sort of funky style to it in terms of clothing. Now with fishing, we've got lots of materials, lots of progression, and again, Ieva and Andy are probably looking. I can go back to days, and you'll remember, Pete, when we had waxed cotton jackets, and in cold weather the sleeves were stiff and hard, and they were horrible and smelly and damp, and all those kind of things. But All that side, all that side of fishing's great. I think we're in a good place. Just as Ieva said, this year there's been a massive injection of people taking up fishing. I suppose the only worrying thing for me is trying to get more youngsters involved. These days, they're sort of lured away with devices and things like that we didn't have. And for me, I'd be keen. Again, mentioning. Bless him, Charles Jardine, what he does in terms of bringing youngsters into fishing. It's just fantastic. And again, I can feel a little bit sort of ashamed or embarrassed that he's doing so much. And, we all try and do our wee bit, but he's really sort of picked up the ball and ran with it there, and good for him. But certainly for me, it would be a lot more reassuring to see more youngsters coming into it. I remember as a kid, as you probably do, Pete, you came home from school, you went up the field and terrorised animals or went fishing, and that was it. Very, very different world we live in. But I think we're in a good place. It seems healthy. For all my sort of bleating about social media, there's a lot of positives on there. Just need to find somebody to show me how to use it properly.
I'll sign up for the course with you as well if there's anything there. But it's lovely, and I look forward to seeing pictures from people going out there enjoying it and having a special day. Be it, and like you alluded to, Paul, and I think you guys as well, and Ieva, that it's not just the fish, it's that bigger picture of everything that means so much. And it's really thrilling. I love seeing where people are fishing, the images of the river. It's not just the fish that interests me, and it's been brilliant to see that. And I'd like to thank you all for being guests on here, all for doing so much for fishing as well in such a positive and great way, and you all inspire people as well, so you should be incredibly proud of that. And just keep doing what you're doing. And it's just been brilliant to have you on here, to have this really interesting chat. I would like to end, Andy and Ieva, where can they get hold of you? Where can they see your YouTube channel? Where can they buy flies? Tell me that.
So I think the easiest thing to do would just be to direct people to the IB and Andy fishing channel. All of our videos are up there, so all the information that people would want is up there, or on my website, abangling.co.uk. Nice and simple.
Perfect. Thank you, Paul. You said you're guiding now, you're tying some flies. If you've got, I guess people have got to write you a letter these days to get hold of you rather than...
Not just a letter, it's got to come by carrier pigeon as well, Pete. And everything else, I only deal with pigeons. Just on probably the easiest avenue, or the quickest, or probably monitor most, is Facebook. So that's just my personal account. Anybody can send me a message on there. It's probably the best avenue. That's where most of it comes from at the moment. There'll be some changes for me after Christmas in terms of a bit more sort of going public with that side of things and guiding again. Fantastic. Well, thank you everyone so much for being such great guests. I think we covered loads in a good, positive way. We've talked about some interesting stuff and covered some interesting stuff and been open and honest and transparent about it, which I think's really, really cool. So I'd like to thank you all for being a guest on the Fly Culture podcast again. Thank you, Pete. Thank you, folks.
Cheers, Pete. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for listening to the Fly Culture podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this one as much as me. Plenty more coming, so they'll be released very, very soon. But thank you, everyone, for listening to the podcast.
The Fly Culture podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly print magazine. For more information, please visit flyculturemag.com. You can also find Fly Culture on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.